the tefillin, please do the back. I don't know, he got mixed up. I'm not accusing anyone here.
God forbid.
But I just mentioned that it got misplaced.
I didn't take it.
Page, you didn't take it. 774, please. 774 Parashat Behaaloscha. Okay, so let's run through this portion. Did I get the right parsha? Even if those who are in Israel have to make an adjustment. Parshas Behaaloscha. So the portion itself is a long one, where it covers many significant events, but there's a significant shift that occurs. There's a break in the portion. A break, where there are two verses that appear and break the portion in essence into two. And as a result, the tone of the portion changes completely. The tone, something happens, right? A drastic change is going to occur in the middle of this week's portion. But we're starting with portion number one. Now, portion number one is really a continuation. Last week we read about the inauguration of the tabernacle. And the leaders of the tribes brought gifts for that inauguration. And Aharon HaKohen plays a role in the inauguration, but by doing something that is not just significant for the inaugural time, but rather is significant continuously. And that is the lighting of the candles, making light. That's what Judaism is about, light to the world. Fine? And we are told here that when you bring up those lights, be sure that all the lights are directed towards the middle section of the candelabra, symbolizing that everything you do for the sake of God. This is just an introduction of Jewish light. But let's run through the portions here and then realize the significant shift. So when I say portions, you're going to be looking at the traditional parshiyot. The term parasha that is used nowadays is not as early and far more significant are the paragraphs. So I'm going to skip from paragraph to paragraph. And the way you know that a paragraph ends is that there is a gap. So paragraph number 1 at 774 was the Nerot. Paragraph number 2 starts with the consecration of the Levites. You are elevating the Levites for their service. They are to inspire us, the Levites. Kohanim included, even the West Coast Kohanim, they're all included. And they are to inspire Klal Yisrael. So they go through a process, long portion there. The next, so page 776 on the bottom, we are given the age of when they perform the service, the Levites. Remember, the Levites we're dealing with a tribe. We're not dealing with Kohanim. At that time, there are basically 3 operational Kohanim. Levites, there are many, so lots of information is shared with us regarding the Levites. Page 778, next portion. They have a halachic shaila. Halachic shaila. The halachic shaila is what happens if you are impure when you bring the paschal lamb. So who gives us the answer here? It's a magnificent one. God Almighty is the one that gives the answer. Moshe asks God. So you get this feeling here that this is a portion that is talking about leadership that is very high, one that is perhaps detached from the nation, which is not terrible, because if you have a leader who is detached, but you grow through him, you are inspired to become better, even though he perhaps does not understand your language. You know, you think about many of the Rabbeim, the people that taught in Sunday schools, after, in the 40s and 50s, and you had these Rabbeim that were clueless about American culture. And they would say, baseball, what means baseball? And, you would tell them about the baby Ruth, what was the baby? In other words, people that were basically clueless. So in most cases, the significant gap, was detrimental for the children to grow, because you had these people from a different planet who were supposed to educate them. You do hear stories of people who were able to grow because they were inspired by their righteousness, their concern, their commitment to Torah. So there are times that the detached leader can actually achieve things. There are such things, and perhaps that's what's happening here. You have Moshe Rabbeinu, you have the Levites who were elevated, you have the halachic question, God Almighty is the one that deals with it. That's the paragraph of 778. And now, if you turn to page 780 now, it is the beginning of the journey of the people of Israel, meaning they are leaving Mount Sinai. We've been waiting, because we've been there for a long time already, and they arrived at Har Sinai in the beginning of the month of Sivan, the first of the month of Sivan. They leave Egypt, some 46 days later, they arrive there at Mount Sinai. They are there for a long time because they have to experience the revelation. Jews have to mess up, it's part of our tradition, so we worship the golden calf. Jews fix it because that's what we usually do, fix things that are broken as well. And then we start the process of building a tabernacle. Eventually it is established, erected, and then starts the journey. The journey occurs on the 20th day of the month of Iyar, which is basically 11 months and 20 days later, almost a whole year. So this is a significant event that is being described here. They begin their journey. And on page 780, the journey is described, which tribes move and which tribes are the one, or which families within the Levites who are designated to take specific items of the tabernacle, because remember, it was a movable structure. And so, again, I'm really focusing more on page 782 here on the bottom, so we'll move forward. Okay? Yeah? What are we told? This is the date that I shared with you, that on the 20th of the month of the second month. Fine, they begin the process of moving. Now, page 784, which is Vayikra chapter 10, verse 25, is we're going to focus a little bit here on activities of a specific tribe and its leader. So here we're going to get into a few details here. They're moving. This is the actual process of the journey itself. And we are told here on page 25, on verse 25, on page 74, so here we go. You're ready. V'nosa degel machane bnei Dan. So what happens is that the banner of the camp of the children of Dan, they travel. And they are in the back of the whole nation. And they serve as a keyword here, me'asef. Me'asef. Vos meint me'asef? So obviously, if everyone is traveling, they forget things. The tefillin gets lost, or different items get lost. So you have a tribe that's gonna, the ones that are at the end of the complete camp, they have this responsibility, which is a great mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, returning lost objects. So they bring things that are lost. Fine, that's a me'asef. But there's more to it as well, because the tribe of Dan, there are several indications throughout Tanakh, they are not perhaps on the highest level. They're not the most spiritual ones. There are physical individuals that achieved great things who are descendants of that tribe, referring, for example, to Shimshon. We find that there were some weaknesses as a result that they were not the most spiritual, like a famous image that was worshipped, known as the image of Micha. So, on the one hand, they have obviously something to achieve, which we're going to try to figure out, that they have a unique role as the ones who are on the bottom, but sometimes, like every trait, if it's used correctly, you can do incredible things. So a personality, right? Troublemakers in school, right, are personalities. They could be very destructive, or that is a personality that could be channeled to understand those who are, not settled by sitting in class. It's a terrible thing if you think about school in general, right? I mean, the idea of sitting for how many hours do they sit by a desk throughout the day? Any of us here would be capable of sitting 6 hours by a desk straight. I mean, some of you are able, maybe, not me. But so making trouble in school is not something supernatural or abnormal. Anyway, so let's try to understand the me'asef. So you know what the real idea of a Danite, a descendant of the tribe of Dan, is about. He is a person that is there to support other Jews, that even if they slip, and even if they are attracted to those things that are very physical, and they start asking themselves, am I still a good Jew? Dan serves that purpose of bringing people in. People that feel that they are outside are welcomed by Dan. He would bring them in, he would gather them in. He would be a me'asef. And he would be in assistance to any one of his brothers, obviously sisters as well. If he finds another Jew that needs some ezer, he would act like a brother. And why? Because he was a person that understood very well that my nation is a nation of God. That we see the HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every single human being, and how much more so in every single Jew. He brings people in. In other words, while the first half of this week's portion perhaps talks about Levites, they're up there, right? They're great people. We love our Levites. But right? So, but historically, the Levites... No, I got it.
She likes Levites.
She very much so. She got a good Levite. So, the Levites are just, not nowadays and the ones we know, but they're basically the leader from above. Very spiritual. Perhaps did not always relate to the weaknesses of people, because a person who never stumbled cannot really understand the weaknesses of the one who did. Right? There are people out there. You go in Yerushalayim, you'll meet sometimes these righteous tzaddikim. They are very concerned for the welfare of others. They love Torah, they love Jews, but they don't really understand a Jew from a background that is so foreign to them. Stumbling, weaknesses, temptation, it's far to them. The Danites understood it. Right? The Danites, they're on the bottom there. But boy, if the person on the bottom does things right, understands them, they could bring people in. This is the tribe of Dan. And they see in their nation the nation of God. So we have here the Danites are people that could turn to their brother and they could say, right, that I am here to be your ezer, achi, right? I'm here to be your ezer. And the reason is because my nation, Ami, what do I see in my nation? I see God, I see Shakai, I see the name, I see God. And if you look at the name of the leader of the tribe of Dan, who is that? Me'asef. Can you read it in the second half of verse 25? Al Tzeva'o, who was the leader of this tribe? It was Achi Ezer, my brother. I will be your Ezer, the son of Ami Shaddai. My nation is God. That's basically what they're all about. And what you have to realize is that this Danite personality that can relate to people where they are holding was unique at that time, meaning in the beginning of this week's portion, he doesn't fit in. There's something unique about him. When other people are the Moshes, right, up there, and the Levites, he's unique here. But when there is this brutal shift that is going to occur in this week's portion, the Danite approach is going to be a very, very significant one. So keep in mind the Me'asef word and the Me'asef idea. Now, when I say there was a significant shift in the portion, you're going to turn please to page 786.
Has anybody analyzed all the names?
There are different approaches to different names. I mean,
What do you
you'll
do
find
with, what do you
the
do with
Gemara.
Achira?
Achira, right? Achire'ah. You could go ahead. There's a Gemara in Sota that talks about the names of the leaders of the tribes who were sent as spies. And it talks a little bit about the idea. Do we have a complete understanding of all? Perhaps, perhaps not so clear. But here it's first of all, the idea that the text itself tells us that this is a unique tribe. It has a unique role. The text is telling us, keeping your eye out for the Me'asef idea. This is what we are being told. And therefore, after the significant rupture that occurs in this week's portion, you're going to get the Me'asef. What are those verses that talk about it? So turn to page 786. And we are told that as they begin their journey, Vayihi bin Soa Ha'aron, when the ark began its journey, Moshe would say, "Arise, Hashem," right? Kumashem, Yafutzu Oyevecha, let's scatter those who hate you. And those who hate you, the foes also should flee. And that's verse number 1. Verse number 2 is that when eventually the Almighty settles, it settles among Jews. In other words, we are basically the people of Israel. Right? The thousands, the tens of thousands, and the thousands. We are the people that when we act as we should, God dwells within us. We, of course, have a mission to have an impact on the world. But we have this unique role, and this is what the verses tell us here. What we always talk about is the uniqueness of those two letters that appear, one before these two verses, one after. And the rabbis tell us that this perhaps does not belong here, but it is there to tell us that this is separating the first half of the portion with the second half, because something drastic is going to occur now. And now begins the downfall. Now, by the way, this downfall is a steep one after the other. And you have to find a fix. When you have a problem, you have to fix it. So now let's start with the downfalls of our people. Because remember, this is a nation that's leaving Har Sinai on its way to the land of Israel, our homeland, to establish itself, right? To live a life involved in a physical realm, but obviously for us Jews, doing things in the physical world appropriately is a spiritual act. Incredible period for us. Are you ready? Your way to Eretz Yisrael. Supposedly it was supposed to be 3 days, and they were in, with Moshe as their leader. And if you think about it, Moshe, anything he does is eternal. The entry should have been eternal. This is a very exciting time, but let's start ruining things as we do throughout history. Verse 1 of chapter 11. Vayehi ha'am, and the nation itself. And by the way, whenever we find the term am without ami or am Yisrael, there's trouble here. When Jews start identifying themselves without God, it's nicht gut, never good, right? So you get a feeling here that there's a problem here. And they begin not actually complaining, but kemitonenim, as if they are complaining. Not like a kvetch, the kid that doesn't want to complain because they'll get into trouble, but you get that little kvetch that something is overwhelming them. So here we have that kvetch, which is evil in the eyes of Hashem. And there's a fire, second half of that verse, we're on page 788. So, what do? You pray to Moshe Rabbeinu, he is the leader. And the fire that came to punish them settles, and they bury it. In other words, they are able to move on from this problem here. They're able to move on. But then, here we're introduced in verse 4 to a new group. Who are these individuals? Well, they are called Asafsuf. Asafsuf. Asaf, people that were gathered. When we left Egypt, people were quite inspired by our journey and the potential of our journey, and they wanted to join. And they joined the people of Israel. But it seems to be that they joined us, but they brought some baggage with them. Ideals, attitudes, pagan gods. And these were people that their commitment was always weak, and they were known as the Asafsuf. And they start desiring a desire. They desire things. And what do they cry about? They cry about the fact that in Egypt there was better food.
Meat.
What? Well, they mentioned the fish that they had in Egypt. But really what they want is they want fleishings. Enough with, enough. I have a word that I hope to share with you next Shavuos that, the tradition of eating dairy on Shavuos. So it's interesting to note that they leave Har Sinai, and what's the first complaint that they have? We want fleishings. So perhaps to commemorate that on Shavuos, we eat ice cream and cheesecakes, right? So that's perhaps the idea of the milchiks, to show that we're not kvetchers. Give me fleishings, right? That's perhaps the idea behind it. But in any event, they want their flesh, and the Torah tells us, their complaints are simply unfair because they were eating this incredible food known as manna. They gathered it; it came from heaven. They had this spiritual food, and they want something far more physical. And now, Moshe hears in verse 10 the complaints, and he is falling. He's in despair, in essence. And he says, Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, why did you cause such difficulty to your servant? Why did you put them? I didn't conceive this nation. You know how it is. To deal with these people with their complaints. It's overwhelming. It is simply overwhelming for me. So, verse on page 790, what do they want? Flesh. How am I supposed to get them flesh? Next parasha, page 790, and here we go. They have an issue with the Asafsuf, the people that were gathered in. So the solution is going to be, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe in verse 16, Esfali Shivimish, bring in, gather the 70 elders. These are people that were outstanding individuals. You should go ahead and bring them. I'm going to place upon them the Spirit of God, which Moshe is usually the only carrier. Here, it's going to be placed upon them. And then eventually they'll get meat. Now you have to ask yourself, wait a second, they're complaining about meat? Right? That's what they want. And what do they get? More leaders. Is that going to work? What is it? What is that all about? What, more mashgichim? What's the solution about? In what way is it a solution? So now, page 792. Number 1. Look on verse 24. Moshe goes ahead. He shares with the people what's going to occur here, that there are new prophets to be joined, who are going to join me. That's the solution to your problem. And in verse 24, Vaye'esof shivimi, she gathers 70 elders. At the end of verse 25, we are told that they prophesize, but they don't do it anymore. In other words, they prophesize, they are elevated. But it's very interesting that when the text tells us that they are no longer prophesizing, it says, Velo yasafu. Again, the same exact word. The end of verse 25, Vayitnabu, they prophesied, but did not do so again. And now, back on the bottom of the page, before the meat is coming, the elders are not there. In other words, Moshe and the elders leave the camp. So let's go through the process here. They complain. Moshe cries out to God. God says, okay, get some elders. They get elders. They prophesize. And then the elders leave before the fleshik come. So, but it's interesting, in verse 30, when we are told that Moshe was brought back into the camp before the birds, the quail, arrived, what are we told? Vaye'asef Moshe el hamachane. He's gathered. For some reason, the Torah is using the exact same word over and over again. And then, page 794, it is here. It's fleshik time. The birds are here, the quail. And they fly into the camp, and the nation starts gathering them. Vayakam, in verse 32, Kol hayom, Vayakam am kol hayom ahu. It was a busy day. And they are, what are they doing? They are gathering up the quail. Vayasfu. Hamamit, even one who didn't work so hard, was able to gather 10 donkey loads. Asaf. All these asafs again. Obviously, the Torah is telling us something with these asaf, right? But sad ending here. It seems to be the request was not appropriate. And in verse 33, the meat was still between their teeth, not even chewed. The wrath of God glared against the people. They are struck. And you have to bury such desire. When there is desire that is distancing you from God, you have to bury it. And they actually call the place, how do they call the place? Kivrot HaTe'ava. You buried not the people so much, but hopefully you buried the desire itself. Now, what's this all about? What's the idea of meat? Oh, you need meat? Let me get some leaders. So obviously, we are taking the done system of leadership, and there's a transformation here. When leadership in the first half of this week's portion are basically individuals who are very spiritual, and there's an expectation from the nation to appreciate their leaders, suddenly God realizes, Moshe realizes, it's not going to work. You need people if they are more physical. If if there are people that need fleischiks, and the leader is not on their level, you need a leader that could relate to them. A leader that can understand them. A leader who is in Osef, that is following the system of the Dan leadership, could relate to the people. Asaf people, who will bring them in, interact with them. It's a lower level leadership, but it's a necessary one. Okay, this is the idea of what's occurring here. So you ask, why are we getting elders for meat? It symbolizes the fall of the nation. They need meat. Now, some of them made requests that indicate that they were simply not appreciating the spiritual opportunity that existed through Moshe and the manna, and they got punished. But there's a message here of leadership has to adjust to where the nation is holding. This is what we learn from here. In other words, if you have leaders, right, who are super in a different realm, that's wonderful. But if they don't know what's happening in the community, if they don't know what people individuals are struggling with, if they don't understand the power of guilt, the stripe that exists, the weaknesses of this generation, it's not going to be successful leadership. This is what we are told here. You need the Asaf individual. But there's one more piece of information that you need to understand what is really occurring here. We find quite often people who bring ideas under the umbrella of Jewish values. Jewish values? They bring it into the umbrella, under the umbrella of Jewish values, like, Tikkun Olam. You've heard of the concept Tikkun Olam? It's a nice thing, right? Concern for the welfare of the world, right? To build homes in Africa, to cure ailments in Papua New Guinea, or to go ahead and assist communities in South America, that they have music schools. These are all nice things. There's no question about it. Right? Are these Jewish values? Are these Jewish values? So on the one hand you could say, concern for humanity? Yeah, that's very Jewish. That is Jewish. It's not something we should laugh at when these people do the Tikkun Olam. These are Jewish values. But the problem is, what happens to the Jewishness if that's all of your education? If you come to synagogue or you come to temple, and that's fine. A coffee break is good for me, believe me. It came in at the right time.
What happened to the 70 people? They came, they promised.
Imagine if every message in the synagogue is, we, the nations of the world, we're all the same. We have to focus on Tikkun Olam. And therefore you're going to concern for Israel. That doesn't fit into Tikkun Olam, because Israel, after all, is an apartheid state, right? They mistreat the Palestinians. There's a lack of Tikkun Olam. And even more so, there are those who are doing Tikkun Olam by helping the Palestinians. There are many, many such things. Giving them schools and opportunity, or assisting them in buying for them equipment where they could film Israeli soldiers and their brutality and show it to the world. And it is part of Tikkun Olam. Okay, so that's Tikkun Olam gone wild, right? Not exactly what we value. But there is Jewishness to this idea, but the problem is that they are doing it, right, before the designated time. We still believe that we have something, we have a mission as a nation. We believe in a messianic period of impact on the world, but we believe in retaining Jewishness, right? Don't put all your focus on Tikkun Olam if you forget the Malchut Shakai, you forget about God, right? I would call that early gatherings, meaning they take ideas, they take concepts, which have Jewish roots, there's no question about it. But they bring it in too early. They bring it in under the Jewish umbrella. We're not ready yet for it. You look in the United States, it's always fascinating on the people who had an impact on the Democratic Party in the United States. People who had an impact on the outlook, the philosophy of the Democratic Party. So let's start with the current president of the United States. Right? You're familiar with? Who is the one name that is given as a community organizer? Community organizer. That's what Obama was. He started his career off. right? Talented guy, the charismatic he is, there's no question about it. So they say that the only way to understand Obama is to understand Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky is, in essence, the person you have to study. There are lectures you could go online and you could look on YouTube on Saul Alinsky. He was known as the community organizer in Chicago, right? You have an issue, a community organizer, and obviously, like what happens often is that these organizations destroy one another because there's so much politics and the mafia gets involved as well. But the bottom line is, Saul Alinsky his root concern was, there are poor people who are suffering, right? In Mississippi, or with the blacks, there was brutality towards the blacks in America in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and there's no question about it. Saul Alinsky believed that as individuals they'll achieve nothing. You bring them together, you organize a community, you're going to have power, black power. Saul Alinsky, that's who you need to understand. Who was Saul Alinsky? Obviously he grew up in an Orthodox home, and obviously he was supposed to be a rabbi, but the Jewish drive of having an impact, right? He brought in values which are Jewish values, concern. But unfortunately, he let go of the Jewishness. He brought things in, I would say, early. When I say early is because, yes, we are concerned. But to make that the whole focus of a religion, when we are not yet there yet, we don't have this messianic figure yet. He brings things in too early. Another personality, and this one was not just someone that was supposed to be a rabbi, he was a top student in the Slobodka Yeshiva. His name was Sidney Hillman. Sidney Hillman. So in the beginning, over 100 years ago, like in the 1901, 1902, he's studying day and night in the Slobodka Yeshiva. Right, a star, memorized Talmud tractates. And then Sidney Hillman gets attracted. Supposedly there was some intellectual on the other side of the river in Kovna, and he starts reading books and starts reading Marx and gets inspired and joins the 1905 revolution in Russia, which failed. Eventually he has to escape to the United States, and he becomes a labor leader. You've heard, if you look in the United States on clothes, once in a while you do find something that's still made in the United States. You'll find a union label. Maybe that's why they're not made in the United States anymore. You find a union label. And often it will say AFL-CIO, right, the American field, or the CIO or something, the Congress of Industrial Organization, American Federation of Laborers, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The AFL-CIO, the mafia obviously has a lot to do with these things. But if you want to talk about the person who really put it on its feet, a Slobodka Talmud is the one. Sidney Hillman, he was on the cover. I looked it up. He was on the cover of Time magazine twice in the 1940s. Why? Because when FDR decides to bring labor in, in other words, the New Deal, who's going to go ahead and do things for him? Who has a good relationship with labor? You got to get Hillman. So Sidney Hillman is the man. These are concerned for the workers. Avigail was reading a book about there was brutality in these shops in New York. There's no question about it. The way the environment in the Lower East Side, in the garment district. I mean, this is schrecklich things. There was a fighter there that Lo Aleinu killed hundreds. The tragedies were overwhelming. Who takes charge of it? Jewish concern. Are these Jewish values? Of course they are Jewish values. And of course it's necessary, but to make that the whole religion, right, to bring it in and make that the essence of Judaism, he is a me'asef, bringing things like that, but a little bit too early. This is the history of Jews in America, and the list is long. The list is very, very long. And the truth is, when you look at the me'asef flaws that are addressed in this week's portion, number one, the converts. Converts, that's a wonderful thing to bring in converts. It's a mitzvah. It's the greatest mitzvah is to treat them appropriately. A person who converts to Judaism because they believe in the values, they're the greatest. There's no question in it. We're supposed to love them, and we do love them. But if you bring them in a little bit too early, when they're not really interested, they're asafsuf. So asifa could be quite problematic. And even the asking of meat. You think meat is so bad? I'm sure the doctors will say yes, but meat in Judaism is very significant. You can't have a Yom Tov meal without meat.
Basar v'dakim.
but you're supposed to have, the meat is really it. Basar v'yayin is really wine, I believe, is even more important. But good meat, what?
Good one.
A good dry Israeli, obviously, yes, not. Meat is important. You know what mitzvahs you achieve by eating meat? Have you ever read sections in Torah that talks about the shlamim and the chagigah and the korban pesach? Meat is an incredible thing. And by the way, when if they would have gone on their journey without kvetching, reached the land of Israel, settled there, they would be eating meat, and that would be considered a holy act. Asking for meat is good. You know what the problem was here? They kvetched a little bit too early. They tried to bring it in. They tried to make it valuable. I mean, it's the desire for meat ruined their, the lack of patience is what brought them down. Asafsuf, asifa, right? So that's what these leaders were here to do. To tell them that, yes, these are things that have their place, but if you do it a little bit too early, right, you will bring about destruction. Now you have to realize that everything in Torah will find references earlier on. And I'm going to ask you now to turn back to Parashat Vayetzeh. Okay? Parashat Vayetzeh. The beginning of Parashat Vayetzeh. I heard one already. So remember Parashat Vayetzeh. He lays there on Temple Mount on page 144. And he puts a rock there and he sleeps and he has a vision, an incredible vision of the impact this location is going to have on the world. And he makes an oath and he begins the process of building that temple with that rock. Right? Incredible vision he has. It's the beginning of a process, but he has to go out to exile. Yaakov Avinu goes out to exile. With an understanding that there's going to be a return eventually. And we are told that the first thing he encounters on page 148 is a flock. Page 148, verse 7. And he notices that the flock, they're doing something wrong. Because, Vayomer, verse 7, he turns to the flock. Yaakov turns to the flock there in Haran. And he says, Hen od hayom gadol. The day is still long. Lo et he'asef hamitne. You are bringing things in a little bit too early. And this is the first time this word appears in Torah with the idea of bringing things in. Bringing things in too early. Now, there are those who are going to play a role in bringing things into Jewishness. And that's obviously Yosef. Right? Yosef interacts with the society. Right? We always talk about the messianic personality of a Mashiach, the son of Yosef. Someone that will bring these things in, values. You talk about beauty, aesthetics. You talk about from music to architecture. These are wonderful things that are very much there to inspire us. There's no question that if God created these, gave wisdom to the human being to create, and there's such beauty in the world, right? People who visit safaris and visit magnificent, and the Alps. These are all things that are to be brought into Judaism. You can't let them take over your Judaism. In other words, your Judaism cannot be only about finding beauty in art and music. Music is great, right? You could go ahead and sit down and watch a YouTube of André Rieu for 2 hours straight, or you could go ahead and be inspired by it, right? But don't make that your whole religion. In other words, the religion has to have Judaism to it. And by the way, when we talk about a temple, a future temple, it is a place where we will have inspiring music. The architecture will be inspiring as well. And that is all to connect us. We bring it in. And Yosef, by the way, the name Yosef, the Torah tells us, is Asaf Hashem et Charpati. The word Asaf appears there. He is a person that brings things together. He can interact with Egypt, right? And he does a lot of tikkun olam. He fixes and establishes and sets forth policies that guarantee survival of a nation throughout difficult years, concern for the welfare of others. Magnificent fellow, but he is a proper Me'asef. He retains his Jewishness, right? He's not bringing things in early. He is ready for it. And when you look at the Jewish calendar, well, Pesach is all about us. And Shavuot is all about us. Right? Humanity was perhaps inspired, but it's a Jewish holiday. There is one holiday where there is going to be an expectation that all nations of the world come to Yerushalayim. And that is the holiday, obviously, of Sukkot. When we read the book of Kohelet, so the commentators note that don't think that this is a message only for Jews, it's a message for humanity, about what life is about. We have a holiday that is really, we read the Haftorah, that nations that don't show up on Sukkot are going to be punished. And it is known in the Torah, not as just as Sukkot, but as Chag HaAsif, Asaf. We gather at the right time, at the right place. We bring things in. We bring people in. We welcome them. That is part of Judaism. Judaism is bigger. Judaism is very big, and all these values we find. It's important never, and again, not in the crowd I'm addressing here, but sometimes I interact with crowds, that when they read about these things that are achieved by individuals, by the Sidney Hillmans, and by the others who are doing for the sake of humanity, you know, they, as they say in Yiddish, machavek. These are valuable things. Being concerned for the welfare of the world, incredible good is being done. The tragedy is only the fact that they are letting go of the Jewish element of it. Right? They're forgetting the Jewishness and forgetting the idea that, yes, we will be doing it, but we have homework. We have to graduate. You want to become an educator, don't start teaching when you are in the first year of college. Wait until you get the document, the diploma, which indicates you are ready for the job and you could retain the values, because we know very well that people that are interested in Tikkun Olam, right? You know, it's interesting that there was a review of a movie, a documentary called P.S. Jerusalem. One of these film festivals, and it's a daughter of, I think, one of the left-wing writers who left Israel, and it's a daughter who moved back to Israel, and of course wanted to educate her children in a school where they teach Jews and Arabs together, and the fact how terrible things worked out in Israel with all its problems. In other words, you have Jews that are taking the Tikkun Olam and basically becoming anti-Israel because of my Jewish values. How does such a thing occur, you ask? Like Ribbon Shalom. Right? In the past generation, it was a merit that 40, 50 years ago, you had all Jews, religious, secular, appreciating the gift and doing for the state of Israel. And now suddenly you have these forces in the United States, and it's terrifying. How does it happen? Well, when a Tikkun Olam is brought in early, right, the next generation is going to have zero Jewishness to it. And it could be really a churban. What you have to remember is the following, that on Tisha B'Av, the day when we mourn everything going wrong in our history, we have a Haftorah we read from the book of Yirmiyah. And the Haftorah from the book of Yirmiyah, as David just mentioned, starts with the words, Tisha B'Av, Asof Asifem Amar Hashem. I will destroy them. But the words used are, you got things wrong here. You are gathering things that you shouldn't. Right? Desire is guiding you to gather, and sometimes ideals are guiding you to gather. But you're not doing it right, that could be destruction. We pray for a Chag HaAsif, for a Sukkot, where indeed we fulfill our mission. In Yerushalayim, Avnu, B'meher B'meinu. Thank you for coming, and everyone have a good day.